Good afternoon again. It's great to be back with the Rogers folks, and we're going into episode 5 and 6, which has been stories and lessons that I'm hoping my college students can listen to and sort of gain some foothold on how they would do some of the projects that I've assigned them. And a quick history is the class that I'm teaching is about art, culture, and heritage. 3 big elements of any community, but somewhat void at different times in different communities, depending on how much energy, people, resources, things have been spent to make those things happen. In Collingwood, there's a great transition from a blue-collar working shipyard, hard-living life story to today, which seems to be one of the icons of art, culture, and heritage in Ontario. So something happened, and so part of my class is trying to focus on with stories from folks who have lived those experiences. And I have with myself Terry Geddes, ex-mayor of Collingwood and ex-warden of Simcoe County, Julie Fawcett. Known Julie a very long time. I played ball with her father and her brothers. And Julie has been involved in many issues in the community to help in those areas. And Kathy Jeffries, longtime counselor and friend of mine. I couldn't think of 3 better people to tell me in their eyesight, memory, positive, negatives, what the transition was all about and how it occurred. And those elements are important because I make my students, okay, so tell me, what do you think the aspects that helped make the changes in Collingwood, and what would you try to do in your community? So it's case study examples. So Kathy, please tell us a little quick story about who you are and yourself and what you remember growing up in Collingwood from the earliest times, and what sort of cultural things do you remember?
Well, I mean, as a young girl, I think in terms of culture, all I really recognized was performing arts and figure skating, and how it always came second to sport in terms of hockey, but and then art in public school and then drama in high school. So in terms of really becoming familiar with what we actually had in Collingwood was when I actually got to be on council and saw the evolution that happened from what we had in struggling artists and performing arts, all of the different arts and culture, really not coordinated and not supportive, working in silos. And then we evolved into, I think, something that's a very supportive structure and something pretty exciting.
And with your contribution and help, many, many moons ago, you were on one of those very first committees that said, let's go out and try to rustle all the artists and creative souls in the region and get them in a room at one time and ask them what do they want, what sort of things could we do to help them make a step forward. So I thank you for that long past contribution. It was fabulous. Julie, tell me about yourself.
Well, growing up in Collingwood, as Kathy said, for girls there was limited recreation. It was more boy-based, I guess you could say. We had figure skating, we had Blue Mountain, of course, for skiing. We had rhythmic gymnastics, there was some, majorettes. We had the majorettes in town. So there was some girl things. And then arts and culture. Arts really was, again, what Kathy said, we learned in our school programs. And then Robert Kemp came into our community and he developed an art camp that some of the younger kids went to. I know my youngest brother Michael did. And then as far as culture, there wasn't a whole lot back then that we could say, but it certainly has blossomed in our community. And we are so blessed to have all of these, the recreation, the arts, and the culture, where they are today, living here. I mean, we knew this secret a long time ago that this was going to happen, and others now are coming into the community and they're contributing to these things for us as well.
Excellent. And Terry?
I concur completely with about the state Councillor Jeffrey, based on our many years of working together. She still is Councillor Jeffrey, and of course Julie and all her great history in Collingwood. I'm a firm believer that all of this happened after the transition being the shutting down of the shipyard, right? But most of the culture that I remember was either driven by the school or the church. And as a result, there was a sense of community when their major events happened, whether it was a choir event at one of the churches in the community, I think of the Bells Choir, or the schools when they had their variety nights. And I remember, probably Julie, you took part in them, and Kathy, but CCI's variety nights showed the performing arts talents that did exist among the young people in the community and drew packed houses every time. So with the transition, things greatly changed, and we have the community we have now. But I'm also a firm believer, as both Kathy and Julie have said, that we never ever forget those who built our community.
So an interesting perspective may be is that if you go back to the 1850s, Collingwood then was a very positive, growing, dynamic community. It had the railway already there to our station, which is a great little heritage cultural spot. And it had brought all sorts of influences to Collingwood rather than a lot of other places in Georgian Bay. And so we had a very large opera hall at the back end of the arena. We had very influential people from around the world living within the community. Do you think that that very early impact of high-end culture established any course that helped us transition again when it happened? It always seemed like Collingwood, and I was an outsider, I came to Collingwood, it was a great move. I came to Collingwood, and I felt that Collingwoodites had an attitude of positive and aggressiveness, and already were sort of proud of their community more than I felt in other areas. Do you think that was created from those earlier Collingwoodites that built a post office second to none in Ontario?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And there was interesting reasons how it got built that way, but the size of the street, our main street, the creation of the slanted roads coming off from the diagonals, the station, all these things were early elements of big intentions of having artistic involvement in the community.
Even the Collingwood Community Arena was built by the majority of people that worked on that were Collingwood shipyard workers. So there was pride in the community no matter what station in life you found yourself at economically throughout the history of Collingwood.
Well, and there was a lot of wealth in this community many years ago. I worked at the museum as a student too, and learned a lot of the history back then. And because we had the shipping industry and we had the shipbuilding industry here, a lot of the captains lived in this area,
Exactly.
and they were the gentlemen that had the money, the captains of the Great Lakes. And so their influence and their family's influence certainly made us believe that they were going to build great things here.
I heard the Huron Club was actually where the captains used to stay, and
The
that's what
Captain's Club.
Yep.
the Captain's Club was there,
Yeah.
and that's
Exactly.
so I felt pretty historic going there and having a pint.
100%.
There you go. Yeah.
A lot of things happened in that Huron house
If the
back
walls
then.
could talk. Yeah, and I think, Peter, you're right. I think the foundation has always been here. It just wasn't coordinated. There was very exceptional examples, but everybody was kind of doing their own thing. But it was something that outside influences could come in and take us to, I think, a better place and a more coordinated effort.
And if I can, Kath, I think that we need to remember when anything happens, it demands a champion, right? And in my many years of experience in Collingwood, when it came to the culture and the performing arts, we had one master champion. And every Julie, Kathy, and Peter, you and I know her name was Barbara Wider.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Barbara was a champion who, with her great influence through the family at Blue Mountain, drove many of the cultural successes within our community. And you and I both know, Peter, that Barb would come to us at least every 6 months with a new plan for a theater for Collingwood.
Yes, and I think champions are a very important aspect of creating that energy within a community. Is that they go and find other people to come in, and they're connected enough. They know who to go talk to,
Right.
and they have a presence. Barb had a presence that was overpowering. And
I think that's an understatement,
Yeah, I
right?
do too.
I mean, she came from Berkeley, California, so already when I knew she was from Berkeley, I went, wow, she's like a hippie. you know, and she was.
She was.
She was.
Yeah.
And she had some ideas that I never heard of before, and they were grandiose, and she was so explosive with and detailed how she told me this is going to be a great idea. And I couldn't do anything but get out of my chair and follow her down the pathway to whatever she thought.
Yep.
And council, quite frankly, by the 7th or 8th proposal, was getting a little tired of us bringing this energy back to the table about why can't we build a theater?
We had
Yeah.
26 proposals over the years.
Yes.
Do you remember the passionate, I mean, it was like watching a great ancient orator the night she delivered her speech to the shipyard guys
Yeah.
who had to say, well, we'll consider it or not. And it was one of the greatest performances I've seen in all my political days. It was people I thought were going to start tearing up and crying. And she was hitting the table and standing up and had her hands flying, and she did a great job.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that those things, those type of people, and there's lots of others we could name that helped hold that banner up. But I think champions in all areas of success is one of those things that we have to find someone to lead the parade. And so in studying your own communities, lots of times you have to go find somebody who's busy and is always doing something, but they're the champions that make things move. Don Paul, you know, you think about Don Paul's, all his things he's done out there, Westlake, all the different groups of people that followed folks made significant impacts to us and helped us get to where we are, I think. So I agree. I think the history had something to do with the speed in which Collingwood transitioned, because quite frankly, when I came here in the early 80s, almost the only thing I knew that was going on was there was 7 or 8 very active bars that had people from all over the region come in, and there'd be visiting musicians. Stompin' Tom Connors, as a matter of fact, I got a phone call one
Louis
night.
Armstrong.
I had to come here. Louis Armstrong was at the old Mountain View. The history of entertainment coming to Collingwood is dynamic. We got to remember that all this was the largest de-embarkation zone in Canada for about 30 years. People would come up on the train, get to the waterfront, and take a boat to Duluth or Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Chicago or Milwaukee. I mean, it was that's why the post office got so big, is they had so much influence. There's some reports that it was going to be the Chicago of the North.
Well, we still call it the Chicago North, especially when we
Exactly.
had our meeting
I
with Mayor
gave
Daley.
You came to Chicago with me, and we gave a speech comparing Collingwood to Chicago and all the really unique things before about 300 members around the Great Lakes. And
Mayors of
communities
around the Great Lakes, yes.
And we built a really strong relationship with Mayor Daley,
Yeah.
Councillor Jeffrey's council with Chicago.
Yeah.
So tell me, do you think, Kathy, that with all these different things that have been going on and ups and downs and the transitions, do you think there's something that has been lost from your perspective of, do you ever sit back and think about, I wish this was happening in Collingwood like it used to happen before we got a little bigger and a little more modern? Is there something missing?
I don't know, maybe community participation in some of the things. I remember when we did our figure skating carnival, we would fill the arena 2 nights, and Thursday night was parents' night, and everybody engaged in those events in a big way. Now, you know, everybody's kind of competing for audiences and attention and fundraising. So I think in some ways it's made us really strong in terms of the arts and culture, but we're still not there in terms of community support of all of the
And
things.
do you think that is because the population of Collingwood is so new?
I don't know if it's so new. The most popular story I hear is people have been here for 20 or 30 years and they're just making it permanent. But for sure there is that influence that they want what they've left behind, and so I don't know where the balance
The
is.
large urban center services and deliveries, then that's, you move up here
And-
and they're expecting the same sort of level of service.
Yeah,
And, yeah.
Yes, and Barbara, she would certainly admonish me if I didn't say we still don't have her theater or the arts center. So I think as far as we've come in a lot of things, we just haven't got that done.
Anything you're missing, Julie?
No, I don't think so, Peter. I think that, you know, when we talk about skating carnivals or we talk about different events in our community, You know, you can walk into the grocery store, and I've lived here my whole life, and I can come out and say, well, I knew 2 people in the grocery store today on a busy Saturday.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's marvelous because all of these new people are going to bring something to the table in the community. They just have to find where they fit in, you know, whether it's on, you know, an executive or a foundation or whatever it might be. They will find their space, and with that they bring a wealth of knowledge and information to help our community grow.
I think we've got so diversified in our special interest groups that we've forgotten the really strong special interest group called community.
Yeah.
And I think back to Summerfest and Winterfest.
Yeah.
Those were the greatest days. You know, you did something as simple as
It was
build-
simple fun.
Right on, Julie. You built something like a broomball
Yeah.
rink, and you did simple things. You had ice sculptures, which were community-based through service clubs and schools and so on. And I long for the day in which you take the entire community and put on an event again. We have tremendous special events within our community, but they're all focused on specific interests. And that one interest around Collingwood, you know, Peter, you and I always wanted to take First to Third Street and close it off in the summertime on the weekends and turn that really into a cultural district, you know, with your artisans and your patios and everything else. But there's still something that nothing pulls community together better than some type of a fest where everybody's involved.
I can think of the one big benefit that I heard all the time from original Collingwoodites was the Friday night Elvis open bar beside the arena.
On Pine Street.
It turned out to be basically a reunion of Collingwoodites.
Yeah.
And people would come from all over Canada
Even
back
woke
for,
them up over at Fawcett's.
over for that night, and they would get together, and there was a real sense of celebration. And those that I met that were from out of town, they said it reminded them of the different events the town used to do on the main street, where all the mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles would gather
Right.
and sit and eat and drink and socialize and really have a sense of community. And so the transition to this modern Collingwood probably has left some of those energies behind. I'm not so sure that people wouldn't be eager to get involved, but special events, when they started, were mostly about bringing some expertise that we had in Collingwood and doing some, you know, far-fetched idea like Ralph and I going to Budapest for the World Wrestling Championships. The idea that Collingwood would support us to do that was strange in the beginning. How we got that event was virtually, it was just luck, because the Russians had all their satellites and the Americans had all their satellites, and we just happened to fit in the middle and won. But we still had that opportunity. But what didn't surprise me was the caliber of person who came to volunteer to do those events. I met people that I didn't know, probably half them. They volunteered, and they were ex-CAOs of this big, huge corporation in Toronto, and they didn't want any fanfare. They just wanted to bring some of their expertise to their new community they were living in, and they were very humble on their background. And I felt, wow, what a wonderful way to be. They were well off enough that they didn't have to worry about what they were doing the next day, and so there was a little advantage over some of the local folks who had to work the next morning. But still, there was a great cohesive energy, and virtually for about 7 or 8 years, we took on world-class championships.
We were the special event capital of Canada. You think about the World Special Olympics.
I think we're
I know,
still number
right?
one destination for anything.
Triathlons, unbelievable all
Yes.
the things that
I
we...
think Collingwood has a tremendous location geographically in Ontario from a transportation perspective, and a lot of ease at getting here. And it's gotten better, and a large volume of hotel rooms. Now, a lot of those hotel rooms are timeshare units that get turned over if people get energized to get them saved early enough. But yeah, it's been, I think that also has brought people in from outside and brought new ideas. It was very interesting listening to Jeffrey Shearer from By the Bay and the radio station talk about his perspective on Collingwood and how he thought a long time ago he wanted to be part of that community because it was vibrant. It was celebrating Canadian history. It was all about working together as a unified, and that was what I always got at the end of these special events was people would say, well, what are we doing next? My dear wife was telling me, you're getting down the road if you do another event in the next short period of time. So, but there was that energy that people wanted to do it. I mean, there was the Jeff and, or not Jeff, I mean the Millers. They're just competing
Ken and
at the
Jill.
world right now.
Yeah.
Ken got second in his weight. And I'm not sure how, I know Ken's in the 70s, but whatever it is, what a pair of fantastic representatives. And
100%.
they said, we want to do this. And away we went. Council supported us going to Atlanta to make a pitch in Atlanta to make it happen. So I think it was having council believe that they could do these sorts of things is also a big, powerful thing. So what's it going to take to get a large theater in Collingwood?
Well, it's going to take a leader. I think we've talked about that. It's going to take some resources, and I guess a proposal that makes sense. You know, you hear of so many communities with theaters that are struggling, so you have to find a business plan that'll support it. And so I guess that's where something will come along and be perfect. I know, but just waiting for it to come along is kind of hard.
So Terry, as people look for that, sorry.
But during our councilship, we took Simcoe Street and the museum area, just keeping it so people can relate to it, and we designated that a cultural district with future cultural opportunities. And we talk about Barb Wider, but I think we also need to recognize Richard and Annika Lex. Because
question.
without their vision and backing it up with their pocketbook, we
Absolutely.
wouldn't have the absolutely beautiful district that we have there now, with even more future coming towards it. Is that a fair comment?
That's
Oh,
an excellent-
absolutely.
One of my notes to ask you to comment on what a great input those two have had to
sorry, I
Collingwood.
didn't realize that.
Very good.
Leaders,
Getting ahead.
they're
Thank you.
leaders.
No,
Well,
Yeah.
I remember when we were doing that, and you know, there was such a debate around the Tremont Hotel and what was going to happen to that.
I
right?
remember getting a Christmas card, and it was from people, and I thought, oh, isn't this nice? Because they were kind of upset about the Tremont and the graffiti, you know. And
Right.
so I got this Christmas card. Well, isn't that nice? We're going to bury the hatchet and just, you know. And I opened the card, and here was a picture of the Tremont and the graffiti, and it said, "Merry Christmas. Hope you enjoy the view that we get to look at every day." Now, I haven't gotten a Christmas card since it's been fixed up and repaired and increased everybody's property values, but it's having a council members, I think, in terms of planning, that have a vision and can see the
Right,
the
and
future.
the most important thing is that they have the courage of conviction to hold to the vision. I go back to the station and the great debate in the community over the station, and the realization that you could not save an old building.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Fred Sproul and John Snade coming up with the idea of working with you and others to replicate it. And now those who were so strongly opposed to it now realize it's one of the most photographed buildings in this whole region.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So it comes down to, as Kath said a minute ago, having the courage to stand by those things. No different than we did the smoking bylaw.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of cultural icons that remain, and without getting you involved in a current council debate, that's not my intent. It's just about, you know, acknowledging the fact that you have a lighthouse, a great imperial lighthouse that has fabulous history, has all sorts of issues and concerns with it, and you have an elevator that's been around since 1946. And knowing the elevator inside out, how that became one of my responsibilities. I think the
was
gentleman
me.
over here was involved. He said, "Okay, Peter, you look after
Go
it,"
look
'cause
after it,
no one
Dennis.
else wanted to look after it.
Keep
so
it around.
I got that one. It's like Mikey will eat it, and that's how I got it. In retrospect, it was a great assignment because I learned a tremendous amount about the history of it as we were taking bits and pieces out and trying to make it as safe
But
as
look what
possible.
you did with it, with the Millennial Park.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Millennium Park is pretty spectacular. I mean, it is an icon, and I look forward to the staff reports going forward and seeing what it is in its future. I think the lighthouse is in the right place. It's with a very great group of people who've done an excellent job on fundraising and have the Fed's ear. So I think that's in the right place. And it's always difficult with projects that large. The municipality just doesn't have the kind of
agreed,
funding, right?
agreed.
You know, you had to paint the building or the letters black to make the white look whiter, right?
And that cost us $25,000, Kath.
Yeah. And so, you know, it's difficult.
Well, we at the time actually investigated painting the entire building.
Yes.
And we had tremendous support. Remember Mark Robinson, Benjamin Moore, and all of that? And we were ready to move forward. And then the Ministry of the Environment came along and said, you got to put a big
Tarpaulin.
envelope over top of this thing so
Yes.
it doesn't impact on the
Yes,
water.
because of all the flakes of the old paint coming off. And so and that didn't stop some of them. There was a gentleman who came up with a self-contained unit that would fit around the bulging part of the silo and have almost like a vacuum cleaner at the bottom part and the scraper at the top, so they would. And it was just financially impossible to move forward.
Kathy, I look to what's happening with council now, and I think you're the one person at the council table that can bring all that history as to the initiatives that have happened in the past, trying to work within the grain elevators.
Yeah. Is there an opportunity here that fits? I'd like to talk a little bit more about the Gang of 25 and that. I think that
It's how we got to this juncture in Collingwood 30 years later.
it really it did set the stage and set us up, and it was under Mayor Getty's his last 3-year term that I was on council, and we had the support to bring people together. And you know, your recollection with 40 people, and then it got narrowed down to 25 people who were really passionate and really cared. And you know, the Hella Sandbergs, Dr. Anderson, Kathy Campbell, there was so many out of the 25 that were just so committed to our process. But by being able to integrate that into our master plan for the town of Collingwood and have a separate art and culture policy, set the stage to have staffing, and then once we had staff, we could move to cultural mapping, and we could and I was telling Peter earlier that we had the big conversation as to whether the mapping should be just Collingwood or if it should be regional, and it became really clear that there weren't clear lines on that. So we did the whole region. So I think that whole process put a united front on arts and culture, but it put a policy in place that allowed for the town to participate in giving some resources to help volunteers. We do it with minor sports for kids. We do it with a lot of things, so why not with art and culture? So
The greatest strength that any community has is its people. I think of Julie and Murray and all the wonderful things they've done for our community and the whole Fawcett family. You know, you talk about a history of, your family probably has more history than 99% of the people here based on how long you've been here and the contributions. I think it's imperative that we have in our leadership in our community, as Kathy just said, the opportunity to give people the autonomy to do what they need to do. I think when we built the trail system, we know a couple of characters, one of whom was called George and the other was called Rad, who had that autonomy working with you to go out and do what had to be done. And I think when it comes to arts and culture, we gave Barb Wider complete autonomy to do what needed to be done. And I think that one of the things we really need to remember that everybody who's elected to council brings their own strengths to the table. But I was a principal. I'm limited in my knowledge of arts and culture and other things. So you need to be able to bring that talented group of people together, as Kathy just said a moment ago, which we were able to do, and give them the autonomy and the respect to move forward with their initiatives, to come to council for support and guidance, and to work together as partners to make it happen.
That document was monumental.
Yes.
And I can remember not having as much patience as I should have, and going to the meetings, and 4 hours later, we had written 3 sentences that were agreed upon by the people. The intent and the efforts and the energies in that room was difficult at best.
That's healthy.
But you know, in retrospect, That's what created the dynamic piece of paper that got us those 2 lines in the budget finally, and that money on a yearly basis to light the little fires with the volunteers and the staff to make all the other creations. And so that dedication for years, and I remember Kathy was very patient and much more patient than I. And I'd go, and I had all sorts of other things going on at that time, but it was people like Kathy who kept the foot to the flame and kept on making the issue resolve, and just take your time and let it bubble to the surface and take the cream from the top. And that's what happened. It was a great effort by mostly volunteers.
But she also had the ability to come to the council table and disagree, but not take it personally.
And make the deal.
Exactly, because that's still the strength of everything. We all have the right and responsibility to have our own opinion and to disagree, but don't take it away. And Kath was a classic example of that.
So for people out there that are unfamiliar with trying to make these situations occur in their communities, it's essential that they create enough documentation and support mechanism and then approach a counselor, because the counselors virtually have to help it guide it through the system. There's so many hiccups and rules and regulations. The person unexperienced in that gets frustrated very easily. So I always tell my students that you've got to get all the research done so that you can provide somebody a one-page recap. Here's what we'd like to have happen. Here's our strengths, here's our weaknesses, almost like a SWOT analysis, and be able to find somebody politically who can share those energies and the passion and walk it through.
But Peter, that's only as good as the staff member too, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very tough relationship. Volunteers, staff, council rep.
You've got to have a staff member that shares in that vision and that energy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, though, council members can give good advice and in terms of what partnerships, that you need to make sure you check with this department and that department and that department, because they have some influence. And I know for a long time I was trying to get the Heritage Committee and the BIA and the Chamber, work together on things. If you come to council and you haven't checked with the other partners, it's only going to get kicked back, because we're going to want to hear from the other partners. So you may as well do your good planning right ahead, and then you don't give us an opportunity to send it back.
Very good advice. So one of the stages for my students when they're in their small town in Ontario and they're looking at in the small town, and they've picked up all the resources. Where can we have the events? And they've looked at all the people that are participating in events. They actually make tables and lists and put them on, and then they create a map, because that visual, the collection and the map, is what you're going to talk about next, is the cultural mapping.
Yeah.
It's the actual doing of that difficult job of assembling all the data and putting it on a map. Now, why a map? Because some people are visually orientated, and seeing it on a map sometimes crystallizes things in which you can do that'll help everybody in the community with a step forward to reaching better opportunities in arts, culture, and heritage. So that's what I'm trying to teach in my class, is to go into your own community, dissect it, research it, come to grips with what's going on right now, and then eventually say, here's how I think I could help make it work a little bit better.
Well, a perfect example of that is the waterfront in Collingwood and the shipyard when we did all the charrettes. And the public process that was involved in that, and bringing all of our citizens together, whether it was through questionnaires or coming to the actual physical charrettes themselves.
Surveys, interviews,
that.
public opportunities.
And then having them ask for what they want. I'll remember as long as I live the night that we had the public meeting about about what I call the spit, which is the elongated portion of our harbor that, for those who aren't aware, that projects itself out into the harbor, which was the old railway base and to the old terminals. And that meeting, out of that meeting that night came an idea from a citizen to build Millennium Park. When we talk, and my entire campaign in 1997 was building a waterfront which the people of Collingwood could use.
Access.
And I was lucky enough to surround myself with strong councillors like Councillor Jeffrey, and smarter, far, far smarter people in the community than me and staff to make it happen. And that, but talking to your students, to me, the essence of all of that is bringing in community, listening to them, and respecting their opinion and working within that.
So Kathy, just before we did the show, brought a little folder to be able to talk, and I think it's a fabulous conclusion to this whole discussion here today is,
Well,
what do you do? How do you make this happen? And why do you have maps? I don't know. I still am struggling with why the map is important. I'm kind of a visual person, so I get the connection, but it really is a map, and it's the tables to support the maps that make the vision for people to vote on it and say, yes, I like this idea.
Yeah.
So tell us.
Well, I think communication is key, and this is the easiest. Even myself looking through here, I mean, there's new additions to our culture. There, of places to be and events where they can be held, and I just think it's just really important to put it all together. You think you know what there is in a community for art and culture, but you start reading this list. Yeah, I think you're going to be blown away. And it's just been, I don't know, it's updated. I don't know if they used our previous one or not, but they had some sponsors, and the Collingwood Creative Community put together the Guide to Visual and Performing Arts. And I think it's a wonderful collection of, and even updated to include our Awen Gathering Place on the waterfront and the importance of that. So, and that Awen Gathering Place will run through. It runs through our heritage. It runs through. I mean, it's public art. It's a place to gather and celebrate whatever you need to celebrate.
And we have the base now. I think of my own two granddaughters who are in Fleetwood dance and ballet and all of that. Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we've created a base now, as Julie had mentioned earlier, of people that have moved into our community
Yeah.
to support all of that and to be part of the driving force.
Like, I mean, the amphitheater and all the programming that goes on down there. It's just
Excellent call, Kath.
phenomenal.
Yes.
The amphitheater.
Yeah, it's just an amazing
We
place.
have so much here that even those of us that have lived here forever are waking up every morning and seeing something new that's being created, and how we can now share it with our families and have them enjoy it for generations. There's so much.
And the influence has gone out even into our buildings.
Oh.
If you think about our library and the creative processes that were allowed in that, in terms of competing for the stained glass windows, and now competing for other things that happen, and really engaging those with artistic talent to be able to showcase their talents in some of our public buildings. I know in our council chambers we have some beautiful art that changes up.
Yes, it is
It's it is spectacular, and it's worth going up to take a visit to see what's going on. But I think it's important. This inventory is really important. It'll need to be updated again, of course, because it's like anything. Once it's fixed, it changes. But I think it's a great place to start.
And I couldn't have written a better conclusion to the episode than that. And with that, I'd like to thank Kathy and Julia and Mayor Geddes and Warden Geddes for a great time and experiences and efforts from the three of you that I've known for 30 or 40 years. I knew you when you were much younger, but
We all did.
Thanks.
but it's been great. You are
Thank
great
you.
citizens, and I thank you very much for helping me try to take some of the elements that can make other communities grow, talk about them, highlight them, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.